Before dawn breaks, the Tudor manor is silent, but not peacefully so. The walls feel as though they're holding their breath. If they could whisper, these corridors would spill secrets sharp enough to ruin reputations, marriages, perhaps even topple a kingdom. And tonight, you're slipping quietly into that life, into the world of a Tudor lady, privileged, polished, endlessly observed, and yet trapped in a cage draped in velvet. Imagine waking every day knowing that your posture, your smile, even the way you breathe is being judged. Imagine living a life where one poorly timed glance could change your fate. What if your entire existence was a performance, and one wrong gesture could cost you everything? But before we wander any deeper into the gossip, the gowns, and the quiet terrors of Tudor womanhood, a little note. If you enjoy creators who stay up at 2 a.m. researching obscure Tudor laundry routines so you can fall asleep to historically accurate ramblings, you might consider subscribing. Don't let all my Tudor suffering be in vain. And tell me, what time is it where you are right now? I love seeing how far these late-night journeys travel. Now, settle in. Let's step into her world. To understand the life of a Tudor lady, you first have to understand the world she inhabited. A world arranged not loosely or casually, or with any of the flexibility we modern people like to imagine we possess, but stacked with the rigid precision of a very judgmental wedding cake. One layer seated firmly upon another, and heaven forbid anyone from the bottom attempted to climb up and taste the icing at the top. Tudor England believed in order, cosmic order, divine order, social order, and order, as every Tudor moralist loved to remind people, was what kept the entire kingdom from collapsing into chaos, or worse, into France. At the very top sat the monarch, glittering, terrifying, semi-divine and unpredictable. Imagine a sun, brilliant, life-giving, but dangerous to stare at directly. Everything and everyone revolved around this celestial being's whims. A monarch's smile or frown could change the course of a nation. A misplaced comment could shorten your life expectancy dramatically. It was a stressful time to be alive. Below the monarch came the nobles, your lady's people, or at least the people she existed near. Nobles were the gilded ornaments of society, the ones expected to shine at court, maintain ancestral estates, and avoid embarrassing the family name. Some succeeded, some, well, we don't talk about them at dinner. A step down were the gentry, respectable, land-owning, desperately trying to act like nobles without actually being noble. A Tudor gentleman could be wealthy enough to buy half of Yorkshire and still be considered socially inferior to a duke with only one working fireplace, because lineage mattered far more than income. 2 steps down were the merchants, the rising middle class, bustling with trade, letters, ledgers, apprentices, and hopes of climbing the social ladder one carefully arranged marriage at a time. And at the bottom, the peasants, the people who worked the land, made the bread, tended the animals, and did almost all the real labour while the upper classes argued about etiquette. Now your Tudor lady did not belong to the merchants or the peasants. Her world was made of embroidered cushions, heraldry, and well-trained manners, but that didn't mean she was powerful or free. In fact, you might say she was privileged in the same way. A very expensive, very fragile vase is privileged, admired, valuable, but under no circumstances allowed to make decisions about where it sits. A Tudor woman's legal status was, well, imaginative. Under the law of coverture, a married woman was essentially merged into her husband. Not symbolically, not poetically, legally. Her property became his, her wages became his, her choices also his. If she inherited anything, the law patted her on the head warmly and handed it straight to her husband. And if she wasn't married, then the rights flowed upward to her father or male guardian. She was a ghost with responsibilities. Every Tudor person, man or woman, lived inside the tight walls of their social class, but women lived in an even narrower corridor within those walls. Society constantly reminded them that their virtue was the family business, their behaviour a public advertisement, and their marriages strategic investments. A misstep could stain a family's reputation, unravel alliances, or bring whispers faster than the plague. And your Tudor lady was born knowing that. She didn't have a choice. That's the strange part. We grow up imagining endless paths, variations of who we could be. A Tudor woman grew up knowing her path was already paved, decorated, and waiting her entire life. Her freedom was not in choosing the road, but in how gracefully she walked it. You may think that being a noblewoman meant being safe, but comfort and safety are not the same thing. Comfort meant softer linens, better bread, warmer fires. Safety, well, that was more complicated. Noble families lived close to power, and power in the Tudor period was as steady as a seesaw during a windstorm. A courtly frown, a failed harvest, a poorly chosen alliance, or one unlucky rumour could throw a household into ruin. Many noblewomen learned early that a quiet smile and a careful tongue could preserve both reputation and life. And while the peasants were vulnerable to hunger and illness, noblewomen were vulnerable to politics. There's more than one way to be unprotected. Even the church, the most stable force in medieval England, couldn't decide what it wanted to be during this period. Protestant, Catholic, Protestant again, your Tudor lady lived in a world where her prayers were occasionally outlawed mid-decade. Imagine practicing devoutly, only to wake up one morning and discover the king had changed the rules while you slept. It kept everyone on their toes, including noblewomen who needed to appear pious without appearing aligned with the wrong kind of piety. Identity, then, was a precarious thing. A Tudor lady learned to define herself not through personal freedom, but through how well she fulfilled the role society carved for her. Dutiful daughter, graceful bride, obedient wife, dignified mother. The lines were strict and the margins were thin. But within those narrow margins, something remarkable happened. Tudor women developed an internal world, quiet, clever, rich with observation and unspoken opinions. They wielded influence subtly, through gifts, hospitality, careful alliances, and the soft power of conversation. They noticed everything. They remembered everything. And while the men strutted around with swords and titles, it was often the women who managed the reputation, the household, the emotional temperature of an entire estate. Your lady's identity was a tapestry woven from expectations she never chose, but she still found ways to stitch her own subtle patterns into the cloth. So before we step into her day, before she wakes, before the candles are lit, before the servants come bustling in, we must understand this. She lived in a world that adored her, constrained her, displayed her, and depended on her. A world where her power was invisible but essential, and her choices few but meaningful. Before we follow our Tudor lady into the day she wakes into, we have to go backward, far backward to the beginning, when she was small enough to be carried under one arm by a determined nursemaid. Her story starts not with silk gowns or whispered court gossip, but with a nursery overlooking an estate she would one day be expected to represent flawlessly. She entered a world already humming with expectation. From the moment she took her first breath, someone somewhere began planning her marriage, her alliances, and the shape her life would take. There was no point at which she sat down as a child and wondered, "What shall I be when I grow up?" The answer had already been chosen, wrapped, embroidered, and placed on a shelf awaiting her arrival. For a noble daughter, childhood was not about discoveries, it was about preparation. Even her toys had purpose. A little wooden cradle encouraged gentleness. A beautifully dressed doll hinted at the wardrobe she'd one day manage. Miniature plate and cup sets whispered lessons about proper hosting. Even the embroidered cushion she sat on taught her to sit still, back straight, chin low, hands folded neatly in her lap so as not to tempt mischief or spill jam on lace. Her training began earlier than you might expect. Before she could form full sentences, she was expected to absorb grace simply by observing the adults who floated around her, like a collection of calm, dignified ghosts. Her nursemaids corrected posture with gentle nudges. Her governess corrected her speech with raised eyebrows, and her mother corrected everything else with the sort of elegant silence that made even toddlers nervous. By the time she could toddle across a room, she had already learned that noble girls were meant to take up as little space as possible, seen, admired, and not overly heard. Lessons came next. Not modern lessons, no multiplication tables or colourful charts of animals. A Tudor noble girl learned things that mattered to her future utility. First came the foundational skills: silence, a very undervalued art today; obedience, stillness. Then came stitching. Endless stitching. Hours of tiny, delicate stitching designed to prepare her for the decorative needlework expected of every noble woman. While modern children might build puzzles or learn songs, she practiced tiny, perfect cross-stitches because sloppy embroidery was quite literally a mark against her character. A crooked rose might as well have been a crooked soul. Then there was French, the language of diplomacy and polite society. Peasant children learned practical words like bread, cow, and rain. Noble girls learned how to murmur French greetings so they could navigate court conversations without looking like simpletons. Imagine being 7 years old and expected to master a foreign tongue because someday it might help you smile convincingly at ambassadors. Music too played a role. The lute was small enough for children to hold, but that did not make the strings any kinder to tender fingertips. A noble girl learned to pluck little melodies, not because anyone wanted to hear them, but because eventually she'd be judged by her musical refinement. The better she played, the more accomplished she seemed, and the more accomplished she seemed, the more valuable she was on the marriage market. One of those small, impolite truths everyone pretended wasn't the point, but absolutely was. Now it's worth pausing to remember that while her days were shaped by grace and gentility, she was still a child, and children everywhere experienced the same little rebellions. When the governess stepped out of the room, she may have dared to run, to spin in circles, to laugh too loudly. She may have hidden under the table with crumbs on her face, only to emerge with an innocent expression that fooled exactly no one. But every rebellion ended the same way, with a reminder that she was not meant to give in to childish impulses for too long. Noble children and peasant children lived entirely different lives. A noble girl rarely went outside unsupervised. She didn't splash in rivers or climb trees or chase chickens. She knew the outdoors from a safe distance, through windows or chaperoned walks where she was prevented from getting anything useful or dirty on her dress. Peasant girls, by contrast, lived lives closer to the earth. They learned strength early, carrying water, tending animals, and helping in fields. Their world was harsher, shorter lives, heavier burdens, but oddly freer in some ways. A peasant girl could shout her frustrations across a field and no one would raise an eyebrow. A noble girl could barely sigh without risking an inquiry. As she grew older, the expectations grew with her. She learned that eyes were always on her. Servants watched her routines, tutors watched her progress, her parents watched her future. She became adept at moving gracefully from lesson to lesson, expected always to present the correct blend of humility, intelligence, modesty, and mild charm. She was not taught to navigate the world. It was assumed the world would be arranged around her, as long as she knew how to play her part in it. And it wasn't only skill she learned, it was emotional training. She learned to accept praise demurely, to absorb criticism quietly, and to never reveal too much of her inner thoughts. If she felt jealous, she stitched. If she felt frightened, she prayed. If she felt angry, well, she did not. Not publicly, not loudly. Anger was unladylike, and ladylike was the currency she was being built to spend. Her childhood wasn't cruel. It wasn't tragic. But it was shaped by a kind of gentle confinement, wrapped in silk and expectation. Every moment carried a lesson. Every habit formed a purpose. Before she ever stepped into the world as a young woman, she already knew the rules by heart, even the ones no one spoke aloud. By the time dawn breaks, she is already a finished product, polished, trained, and prepared for a life she never chose. She wakes before the cold light touches the floorboards, long before the manor's hallways fill with footsteps or voices, or the soft clatter of someone carrying too many jugs at once. In these earliest minutes, the house feels half alive, as if it hasn't yet decided whether it wants to fully wake with her. Her chamber is quiet except for the faint crackle of embers lingering in the hearth, refusing to admit that their fire burned itself out hours ago. They glow with stubborn dignity, like old men in taverns insisting they're not tired yet. The air holds the night's chill with surprising determination. It slides beneath the heavy bed curtains, brushes her cheek, and curls its fingers around her ankles. She lies very still at first, trying to understand the world by sound alone. A distant creak of wood as the roof adjusts to the cold. The faint hoot of an owl that has not yet given up its night shift. Somewhere outside, a horse stamps a slow, sleepy rhythm into the earth. The manor breathes, stretches, and waits. Her eyes open to darkness only slightly softened by the thin grey promise of dawn. She blinks a few times, soft, patient blinks born from years of expectation that mornings should be met calmly, gracefully, without the flailing panic that modern people often use to greet alarm clocks. She's not jolted awake. Tudor noblewomen are trained to rise as if waking was entirely their choice. Her first thoughts are quiet, not words really, more like an emotional temperature check. A slow gathering of awareness, a sense of here I am again, followed by the faint anticipation of the day's demands. Not fear, not dread, just the familiar weight of duty stretching itself like a house cat across her chest. She breathes in and lets her mind settle. She knows that once she steps out of bed, her day becomes a performance, and performances are exhausting. For these last few minutes, she is simply herself. And if you were in her bed this morning, you would feel that same breath of cold against your cheek. You would lie beneath the heavy blankets, cocooned in wool and linen that smell faintly of lavender, wood smoke, and the soft metallic tang of winter air. You would feel the mattress, a bit uneven but surprisingly comfortable, shift slightly beneath you as you adjusted your weight. And you would hear all those small sounds too, the kind that modern life has drowned out, the tick of cooling timber, the sigh of wind against shutters, the hum of a world waking gently around you. You would blink into the dimness and watch the faint silver-grey light seep in around the edges of the curtains. It creeps across the room one careful inch at a time, illuminating carved chests, embroidered screens, and the soft outline of a chair where yesterday's garments hang neatly arranged. Everything carries that hushed quietness that only exists when the day hasn't yet begun to demand anything of you. For her, these moments are precious. They are not luxurious, not in the way people imagine luxury, but they are hers. She uses them to arrange her thoughts with the same precision she later uses to arrange her posture. Her mind quietly inventories what awaits her. A morning greeting that must look effortless, small social expectations she must navigate, a conversation she hopes will be civil, a prayer she intends to say with sincerity, even though she knows someone will be watching her as she says it. She prepares mentally the way soldiers prepare their armor, slowly, deliberately, creating a buffer between herself and the day. But for now, she lies there, wrapped in the last remnants of nighttime safety. There is a clarity in these dawn minutes that she enjoys, even if she would never admit it to anyone. It is the only time of day when the manor does not need her attention, when her family is still asleep, when the servants have not yet begun their bustle, when the world outside remains undecided about whether it feels like winter or spring. It is here, in this half-light, that she feels closest to something like freedom. You can imagine her shifting slightly, turning her face toward the dim glow sneaking past the curtains. You can almost feel the cold air drift in to greet you as well. A polite but undeniable reminder that Tudor houses had strong opinions about insulation, and most of those opinions were absolutely not. The cold nudges at your toes, urging you toward wakefulness, as if it has a schedule to keep. She exhales, long and slow, warming the pocket of space beneath the blankets. This is the breath before the day claims her. The breath before voices stir downstairs, before footsteps echo in corridors, before duties take form and consequences awaken beside them. She savours it. She takes another. She lets the stillness sit with her. Many people imagine that noblewomen woke surrounded by comfort, cushioned from all hardship. But comfort is not the same as ease. Her bed is warm, yes. The linens are fine, yes, but expectations curl beside her more tightly than the covers ever could. Even now, in this quiet dawn, she knows she cannot linger much longer, because lingering invites questions, and questions invite scrutiny. You would feel that too if you were her, that sense of being watched, even when you're alone, of being expected to rise gracefully, as though grace comes naturally to every person who has slept only 6 hours, because she stayed up too late reading something she shouldn't have. You would inhale the cold air, press your palms briefly against the blankets, and ready yourself to begin the gentle ritual of shifting from herself into her role. But she does not rush. She lets the day approach her slowly. She gathers her thoughts like threads and wraps them neatly, so they will not unravel later. She waits until the grey light becomes steady, and only when the moment feels right, when the world has stretched fully awake, does she move. That first motion is not grand. It is quiet, steady, intentional. A noblewoman wakes the way she lives, carefully, and if you're still listening, you really should subscribe. Otherwise, all this Tudor sleep deprivation was for nothing. Long before your Tudor lady even speaks a word, her house has already made several announcements on her behalf. In Tudor England, architecture was not just shelter. It was a social resume carved into oak beams and chimneys. Her home introduced her to the world before she walked into a room, and it did so with the confidence of a very chatty relative who has no concept of boundaries. The manor, sprawling and self-assured, rises from the landscape like a creature built entirely out of hierarchy. Nothing in it is accidental. Everything is placed just so. Even the shape of the building tells a story, wings extending outward like open arms, though one suspects the arms are open only to those of proper breeding and correct footwear. Inside, the geography of her world unfolds with the precision of a map crafted by someone who believed in order and drafts. Tudor houses insisted on those. No matter the wealth of the family, there was always a helpful breeze sneaking through a crack, reminding everyone that insulation was still a concept awaiting invention. The air moved freely, even when people could not. Rooms were arranged by importance, which is to say, by proximity to people of importance. At the centre of this intricate social puzzle lay the great hall, the beating, echoing heart of the household. It was a space meant to impress, intimidate, and loudly proclaim, "Yes, we do in fact own land. Thank you for noticing." High ceilings, long tables, tall windows, everything exaggerated slightly beyond practicality, so visitors would understand at once that they were in the presence of significance, or at least people who fervently wished to be seen as significant. Your lady's private world lay above or behind this grandeur, tucked into chambers designed to keep her dignified, comfortable, and under the subtle strain of being endlessly observed. Her bedroom was not merely a room, it was a statement. The carved bedposts, the heavy curtains, the embroidered cushions, all of it whispered of lineage and wealth. Even the bed itself had a personality. Large, dignified, slightly judgmental perhaps, given that it had supported generations of nobles who were expected to sit, rise, and even dream with decorum. The tapestries lining the walls served multiple purposes. They insulated the rooms, decorated them, and, most importantly, communicated messages about family history, allegiances, and carefully curated morals. A visitor entering the chamber might see hunting scenes, biblical tales, mythical battles, or allegories so symbolic they practically needed subtitles. Tapestries functioned like a Tudor Instagram feed, carefully selected visuals designed to impress guests, hide imperfections, and gently remind people that the family was cultured and firmly on the right side of politics, whichever side that happened to be at the moment. Portraits also dotted the walls, staring down with the solemn expressions of people who were determined to look important for all eternity. Some depicted ancestors who had accomplished something noteworthy. Others displayed relatives no one liked to talk about, but whose portraits were too expensive to throw away. They stood one beside the other, forming a silent audience that watched every move your lady made. Nothing says, "Good morning," quite like your great-great-aunt's stern expression greeting you from a gilded frame. Rush mats covered the floors, replaced frequently to combat Tudor smells that can only be described as ambitious. They muffled footsteps and added a pleasant crackle as people walked. The mats brought texture and warmth, though not always evenly. Stepping on a fresh rush mat could feel delightful, while stepping on one overdue for replacement might encourage philosophical questioning. Beyond her chamber lay passages not meant for noble feet. Servant corridors threaded through the manor like hidden veins, narrow and shadowed, designed for efficiency rather than elegance. These secret routes allowed servants to appear and disappear in ways that made the household seem effortlessly orchestrated, though, in reality, it involved a remarkable amount of sprinting with trays and the occasional whispered panic. The manor changed personality with the seasons. In the summer, sunlight spilled through tall windows, bathing rooms in gold and showing off dust motes like tiny, lazy dancers. The air warmed, the tapestries softened, and the entire house seemed to loosen its shoulders. But in winter, winter was a different empire entirely. Frost crept along window edges. The stone floors became frosty adversaries. Every room breathed cold through cracks no one had properly sealed since the reign of Henry VII. Fires roared in hearths, yet somehow managed to heat only the area directly in front of them, leaving the rest of the room shivering politely. But even in its chill, the manor was magnificent. A noblewoman's home did not simply shelter her. It shaped her. It reminded her every day that she was part of a lineage, a structure, a network of expectations that pressed in from all sides. Her environment was both comfort and cage, a beautiful, gilded cage with meticulously carved oak beams and exactly the right number of windows to signal wealth without suggesting extravagance. Extravagance, after all, was a dangerous thing. Too much of it made people suspicious. Too little made people talk. And so, her home balanced itself carefully, just as she must. She learned its rhythms like one learns the mood of a companion. She knew which steps would creak, which hallways echoed too much, which corners held drafts that would undo hours of heat. She moved through it with understanding, admiration, and occasionally the quiet irritation that comes from living in a structure designed more for show than convenience. Now that we have walked through the geography of her world, its grandeur, its symbolism, its lurking breezes, we can follow her deeper into the life lived within its walls. If you want to understand a Tudor lady's day, you must first understand this. Her clothing was never just clothing. It was a sentence, a paragraph, an entire political dissertation stitched neatly into fabric. Before she opened her mouth, before she even entered a room, her garments had already delivered a speech on her behalf. They proclaimed her rank, her wealth, her alliances, her piety, her marital status, and sometimes even her mood. In a world where actual words could get you into trouble, the safest way to communicate was through cloth, and she knew it. A Tudor lady's wardrobe was less a closet and more a coded language. Every layer said something, sometimes loudly, sometimes subtly, but always intentionally. A modern person might look at her ensemble and think, "How beautiful." A Tudor person might look and think, "Ah, yes, her family must be on very good terms with the crown this season." Or, "That embroidery is suspiciously fine. Who is she trying to impress?" Or, if they were particularly bold, "Someone's husband must have had a very good harvest." Colours were political weapons too. Wearing scarlet, for example, hinted at both wealth and authority. Not everyone could afford dyes made from crushed beetles. Crimson was a shade that said, "I have connections, influence, and enough money to tint myself in the blood of exotic insects." Gold was even louder, daring, confident, and eye-wateringly expensive. Black, surprisingly, was the colour of real luxury. Achieving a rich, deep black required skill and cost. A well-dyed black gown was like wearing a moving shadow that whispered, "Yes, I'm important enough to dress like a very elegant void." Blue suggested serenity and piety. Green suggested renewal, fertility, and occasionally scandal, depending on who was interpreting the symbolism that week. Purple. Well, purple was a rare colour of power, and usually reserved for royalty or people who wished to be accused of impersonating royalty. Each colour had a meaning, and each meaning had consequences. And while the colour of her gown could signal political alignment, the style could signal allegiance. Is she wearing a French hood? Then perhaps her family leans toward continental tastes. Is she in an English gable hood? Then her household is dedicated to tradition. Is her neckline modest, pious, serene, virtuous? Is it a touch too low? Ah, now there's gossip waiting to be embroidered into the next tapestry. Elegance was an expectation, not a luxury. Tudor noblewomen were supposed to glide, not walk, float, not step, place themselves gently into rooms rather than burst into them like excited puppies. Clothing assisted with this illusion. Stiffened bodices encouraged perfect posture. Long skirts ensured slow and careful movement. Layers upon layers created a sense of graceful weight, like a human bell tower designed to sway gently but never collapse. And those layers, oh, the layers. A Tudor lady wore more garments at once than a modern person might wear in an entire week. Not because she loved laundry, she absolutely did not, but because each layer served a purpose. Some trapped warmth, some displayed wealth, some maintained modesty, and some acted like a very polite form of restraint, limiting her stride, narrowing her motions, and reminding her at all times that her body was to be controlled, not expressed. Her clothing was both armour and prison. It protected her from the cold, from disapproval, from accusations of impropriety. It restrained her from running, lounging, sprawling, or indulging in anything that might be considered unfitting. Every time she moved, the fabric reminded her of who she was expected to be. And then there were the sumptuary laws, those charming pieces of legislation designed to dictate exactly which class could wear what. These laws attempted to maintain social order by ensuring that no one dressed above their station. You couldn't simply wake up as a merchant's daughter, declare yourself fond of velvet and drape yourself in it. Velvet was for the noble. Satin was for the noble. Certain furs, jewels, dust and fabrics were also for the noble. The laws essentially acted like a very judgmental fashion police, except these officers wore actual armour and had actual power. The logic behind these laws was simple. If everyone could dress like a noble, how would anyone know who to bow to? And without bowing, what even was the point of society? So dressing was never a simple act. It was a negotiation between status and law, between ambition and propriety, between personal taste and political caution. A Tudor lady could not simply pick a dress she liked. Imagine her standing before a carefully organised chest, thinking, if I wear this, will it imply the wrong allegiance? If I wear that, will someone assume we are richer than we are? If I choose this colour, Will anyone think I'm too cheerful? If I choose that colour, will someone think I'm mourning something I'm not actually allowed to mourn? And underlying all of it was the relentless expectation that she must appear effortlessly elegant, that her clothing must look as though she merely woke up and was naturally covered in brocade and pearls, that she glide through rooms adorned in fabrics worth more than a farmer's annual income while pretending none of it weighed a thing. Her attire was a silent performance, one she'd trained for since childhood, one she would perform every day without ever acknowledging she was performing. The rustle of her skirt spoke more than her voice ever could. The gleam of her embroidery carried more weight than her opinions. Her garments shaped how people treated her, judged her, desired her, mistrusted her. Clothing was her language, her armour, and her cage. Breakfast in a Tudor household was never merely breakfast. It was a quiet stage play performed daily, with roles assigned by birth, chairs arranged by hierarchy, and moods delivered with the subtlety of gently sharpened knives. And our Tudor lady knows all of this the moment she enters the morning room, an entrance she makes with the soft dignity of someone who has long accepted that every step is observed, evaluated, and occasionally judged. She does not rush. Rushing is undignified. She moves with the calm, gliding pace of a person who has spent her entire life walking between social expectations, as though they were tall, wobbling candlesticks. The morning light slants through the narrow windows, tracing silver lines across the wooden table. It glows just enough to make everything look serene, which is helpful. Because serenity is not guaranteed. It depends entirely on who is already seated. Her first glance tells her everything. Her father is present, upright, composed, already halfway through his morning readings. Her mother is there too, her posture perfect, her expression reflecting the sort of practiced composure that suggests she has already meditated on patience today. A sibling sits to the right, already generating quiet mischief simply by existing. Another relative, perhaps a visiting aunt or cousin, has taken her seat slightly too confidently, which will become a topic whispered about later. This is the silent language of the Tudor breakfast table. Before you even sit, you understand the mood. Before a word is spoken, alliances have been drawn, mild irritations have been noted, and possibilities for gossip have begun to hatch like tiny social chicks. Your lady moves to her place, the one she has sat in for years. Chairs are not chosen in Tudor manor houses. They are assigned by the natural laws of hierarchy, which dictate exactly how far one sits from the patriarch, how angled one's chair should be, and whether one's presence demands a small nod or a simple downward gaze of acknowledgement. No one announces these rules aloud. They are inherited, observed, and obeyed with the absolute seriousness of religious doctrine. Seating arrangements communicate who has influence, who is rising, who is slipping, and who is to be ignored completely except when politeness requires otherwise. She takes her seat with a gentle exhale, and now, here is where we slip from observing her into becoming her. As you sit at the breakfast table, you feel eyes on you, not hostile, not even judgmental, just attentive, interested in whether you will uphold your role as expected. You feel the familiar weight of etiquette settle around your shoulders like a well-tailored, slightly suffocating cloak. You adjust your posture automatically, because slouching is the kind of small rebellion that would spark quiet horror across at least 3 relatives. You can sense the mood without anyone speaking. There is a stiffness in the air, a stiffness that tells you your father is thinking about estate matters, and your mother is thinking about how to diplomatically remind a visiting family member that their loud opinions are not welcome before noon. You read all of this in the tilt of a chin, the lift of an eyebrow, the rustle of a sleeve. This is not breakfast. This is a morning landscape of power. You reach for your cup, or rather your hand begins to reach for your cup, because your movements are gentle and controlled. You are mindful of sound. A cup set down too loudly suggests irritation. A pause too long suggests indecision. A glance at the door suggests impatience. Every action becomes a sentence others will interpret, whether they mean to or not. Your sibling shifts. A tiny sound, but in the morning quiet it rings out like a trumpet announcing mischief. You catch the flicker of amusement in their eyes. They enjoy these meals more than you do. They see the table as a battlefield of subtle entertainment. You see it as something more delicate. Breakfast is where the emotional temperature of the household is taken. Your mother gives the slightest, softest nod, a gesture that tells you she's pleased with your calm presence today, that you have arrived without looking flustered or preoccupied. It is amazing how much warmth can be communicated through a nod you pretend not to notice. Someone clears their throat politely, and the sound carries authority. In this world, even clearing one's throat is a declaration. It says, "I am present," or "I have something on my mind," or "I expect everyone to acknowledge this slight irritation I feel towards someone's behaviour, which I will not specify." Meanwhile, the visiting aunt radiates a very different energy. She sits slightly too upright, slightly too forward, in the way of someone who desperately wants to appear relevant. Her smile is a little too bright, her greeting a little too enthusiastic. You sense your mother's mild discomfort, a discomfort she hides gracefully behind lowered lashes, and there it is again, the quiet power dynamics of these seemingly harmless rituals. Breakfast is not where decisions are made, but it is where decisions begin to form. It's where impressions are built and reinforced, where small tensions gather like condensation on a window, where a soft giggle from a younger sibling might lighten the mood, and a single ill-timed sigh might darken the entire room. As you sit there, feeling the gentle warmth of the mug between your hands, you understand that this moment determines the tone of your entire day. If you're serene, the household will breathe easier. If you appear troubled, questions will arise. If you're too cheerful, someone will assume you're hiding something. It is impossible to win, and yet you are expected to win gracefully. Still, there is a comfort to this ritual, a steady rhythm, the sounds of pages turning, the subtle clearing of throats, the small exchanges of glances that communicate more than words ever could. You know this world well, you understand its rules, you understand your place in it. You breathe quietly, letting the morning settle around you like a soft shawl woven from expectation and familiarity, and though the table is full, there is a loneliness to it, a loneliness not born of isolation but of restraint. No one is their fullest self at breakfast. Everyone is their most polished version. But this too is part of her life, part of your life now. These gentle, intricate morning politics shape everything that follows, and as the soft hum of the household rises in the distance, you know it is time to step deeper into the day. If a Tudor manor was a kingdom unto itself, then the women within it formed its most intricate, delicate, and occasionally dangerous web. This network of daughters, mothers, cousins, aunts, companions, and ladies-in-waiting was less like a sisterhood and more like a garden, beautiful, cultivated, filled with sweet blossoms and the occasional thorny surprise waiting to poke you when you least expect it. To live among Tudor noblewomen was to live among constant influence, warm, cold, patient, cutting, all wrapped in curtsies, compliments, and half-whispered confessions. Your Tudor lady understood this intimately. She grew up in it, learned it like a language, and now navigates it the way a seasoned sailor navigates shifting tides, carefully, silently, with a polite smile that hides at least 3 separate interpretations. Within the walls of her home, female relationships bloom in layers. First, there is her mother, a stern, elegant presence whose affection is expressed through corrections. A lowered eyelid means you can do better. A tiny smile means you did not embarrass the family today. This is love in its Tudor form, gentle guidance delivered with the emotional subtlety of a lace-covered hammer. Her sisters, if she has them, form a different constellation. They know her history, her weaknesses, her triumphs. They can predict the exact moment she's about to laugh and the exact moment she's about to cry. But sisterhood is rarely uncomplicated. They love her, yes, but they also compete with her for praise, for attention, for alliances, for future prospects sealed quietly by the adults who hover around them. Love mixed with rivalry creates a tension delicate enough to fold into embroidery and sharp enough to cut with. Then come the companions, girls of similar rank, sometimes from neighbouring estates, sometimes sent to complete their education in households not their own. These young women are part guests, part apprentices, part friendly spies. They're expected to be pleasant company, helpful hands, and observers of everything happening within the family. They sit beside your lady during quiet moments, sighing about poetry or gossiping softly about someone's questionable musical talent. Yet every companion carries the unspoken potential to become either an adored confidant or a lifelong source of irritation, sometimes both. And then, the ladies in waiting. These women are more intricate than lacework, more layered than the house's shadowed staircases. They serve, yes. They assist, yes. But they also influence. They are the eyes and ears of the household, absorbing information as naturally as they straighten a sleeve or adjust a veil. They shape reputations delicately, never outright lying, never outright flattery. Just shading. A gentle redirecting of interpretation. A lady in waiting can elevate someone's reputation with a single well-placed comment. She can also bruise it with a quiet observation that spreads through the manna-like perfume, or smoke. Your Tudor lady knows this, and the ladies in waiting know she knows this. Everyone remains very polite. Navigating these women requires a special kind of intelligence, not the academic kind, though she has that too. No, this is emotional geometry. The ability to measure the distance between herself and another woman not in steps, but in trust. Who gets the truth? Who gets the edited version? Who gets the gentle smile reserved for people one would rather avoid entirely? This is where the real politics of the household unfold, not in council chambers or at grand feasts, but in the quiet moments between women. A shared glance across a room can mean alliance. A raised eyebrow can mean warning. A compliment can mean affection, or strategic positioning. It all depends on tone, timing, and whether the compliment was about appearance or character. One is harmless, the other is ammunition. Confidences are shared sparingly, but when they are shared, they forge bonds stronger than embroidery thread. Two women whispering by the window may be discussing books, or fears, or the very important matter of who nearly tripped on the stairs yesterday, and what that must surely indicate about their moral fortitude. But secrets are double-edged things. To share one is to place a piece of your power into someone else's hands. A Tudor lady does not do this lightly. She might lean close in the night, whispering something soft to a sister or a friend, feeling the relief of honesty. But part of her always remains watchful, because tomorrow, alliances can shift, and yesterday's whisper might become tomorrow's whispered about topic. Still, there are moments of true warmth, laughter that escapes before it can be managed, comfort offered without expectation, a hand squeezed under the table, a shared look that says, "Yes, this is absurd, but at least we're in it together." These moments are real, even if wrapped in layers of etiquette. There is envy too, someone's beauty, someone's talents, someone's prospects. A servant's innocent remark about another woman's embroidery being exquisite can create a silent tension that lingers for days, not out of malice, just out of comparison, the oldest companion of womanhood. But no rivalry ever becomes so blatant that a man would notice. Tudor noblewomen are experts in choosing silence over spectacle. They know how to smile while thinking far more complicated thoughts. They perfect the art of polite neutrality, a skill that has saved many reputations. And through it all, your Tudor lady stands in the centre of this web. balancing connection and caution, giving just enough warmth to maintain harmony, keeping just enough distance to protect herself. She knows that the women around her influence her far more deeply than the men who claim authority over the household. These women shape her days, her perceptions, her sense of belonging. They are her allies and her rivals, her comfort and her challenge, her reflection and her contrast. This world of feminine connection is as political as any council chamber, but far more delicate, and she must navigate it with poise, kindness, and a willingness to pretend ignorance at precisely the right moments. And since you're still here pretending you don't enjoy this as much as I do, you might as well subscribe, otherwise all this Tudor emotional gymnastics was for nothing. A Tudor lady's education was not designed to expand her horizons. It was designed to polish them. It was less about preparing her to navigate the world, and more about ensuring she could decorate it with grace, intelligence, and just the right amount of modest sparkle. Everything she learned served a purpose, and that purpose was to make her worthy of admiration, worthy of marriage, worthy of being displayed without causing scandal, embarrassment, or, heaven forbid, independent thought expressed at the wrong moment. Her lessons began early and continued consistently. While her brothers studied Latin declensions with the glazed expressions of boys resigned to their fate, she learned languages in a very different way. French was encouraged, not for diplomacy but for elegance. Italian was admired, not for politics but for poetry. She was expected to pronounce foreign words delicately, as though each one were a small jewel she rolled across her tongue. No one imagined she might ever travel to these countries. The purpose was simply to appear cultured, the intellectual equivalent of wearing a tasteful necklace. Dance was another essential accomplishment. Not the joyous dancing one might imagine, the sort involving laughter and impulsive spins in the grass. Tudor dance was ritualistic, choreographed, the kind of dance that required poise, memory, and the ability to glide as though one's feet were on invisible wheels. Each movement conveyed refinement, each turn suggested discipline, and each carefully controlled gesture served as a reminder that even pleasure was expected to follow rules. Music held a similar place in her life. The lute, the virginals, the harp, elegant instruments that made her fingers ache long before they ever made her sound good. Her tutors encouraged lightness of touch, emotional restraint, and posture so upright it would impress even the sternest portrait in the hallway. Music was not about expression. It was about accomplishment. A noble lady should know how to play something sweetly, just well enough to charm guests without performing so brilliantly that anyone might suspect she was talented enough to overshadow her future husband. That would be a terrible miscalculation. Needlework was her true marathon, endless, repetitive, delicate. Hours upon hours spent drawing thread through cloth, forming flowers that never wilted and birds that never breathed. These embroidered images decorated everything: cushions, sleeves, wall hangings, handkerchiefs, each one a testament to her patience and her value. A finely embroidered scene told the world she was disciplined, diligent, and capable of devoting a concerning amount of time to things that would later be admired for 3 seconds and then placed politely aside. And then there was estate math. Yes, math. But not the kind of math that leads to thrilling discoveries or engineering triumphs. Instead, this was practical arithmetic, household accounts, costs of provisions, calculating yields, tracking expenditures. A noble lady needed this skill because while her husband travelled or attended court, she was expected to keep the estate running. The irony is that she could competently manage a household of dozens, but was not legally allowed to own a spoon. Tudor logic worked in mysterious ways. Books added another layer to her education. Her reading list depended on her household's leanings. Religious texts were essential. After all, piety was a cornerstone of feminine virtue. Her library might include moral guidance books, conduct manuals, translations of classical works, or romances filled with noble knights and swooning maidens. The content wasn't as important as the impression. Reading made her seem thoughtful, virtuous, and appropriately serene. But books also held a quiet danger. The wrong book at the wrong time could stir the wrong ideas. A character too bold, a heroine too clever, a moral too ambiguous. These could inspire questions. The kind polite Tudor society preferred she keep to herself, so she learned to read beautifully while thinking discreetly. All of this stood in contrast to the lives of peasant women. They didn't learn French. They didn't glide through choreographed dances unless one counts slipping in mud during chores. Their music was sung openly while working. Their needlework was practical, mending, not embellishing. Their math involved counting eggs and market prices, not inventorying silver or calculating how many bolts of linen were required to clothe 15 servants. Yet peasant women had a freedom noblewomen often lacked. They spoke more openly. Their hands moved where they pleased. Their laughter carried without restraint. Their intelligence was used for survival, not display. In many ways, the lady and the peasant lived on opposite ends of a seesaw, one weighed down by privilege, the other balanced on necessity. Still, the Tudor lady was expected to cultivate intelligence, polished intelligence, enough to appear capable, not enough to appear threatening. She must read but not critique, play music but not yearn for the composer's life, understand mathematics but never discuss it with men who thought themselves experts. Education was a lantern she carried, casting soft light around her without ever allowing her to shine too brightly. The pressure of this balance was constant. If she appeared too intelligent, she risked being labelled difficult, unnatural, or, worst of all, opinionated. If she appeared too ignorant, she risked embarrassment, pity, or dismissal. Her worth rested somewhere in the precise centre, a narrow 5-inch plank bridging two abysses, and she walked it every day. Her education was not simply knowledge, it was performance. Every French greeting, every embroidered petal, every careful note plucked on her instrument became part of her value. Accomplishments formed the script of her life, recited gracefully at dinners, court visits, and quiet afternoon gatherings where noblewomen pretended not to compare one another. If she excelled, she became sought after. If she faltered, she risked fading into irrelevance. This world of silent expectations shaped her mind long before she entered adulthood. It moulded her into a woman who could bend without breaking, speak without speaking too much, observe everything while revealing nothing. Even if your Tudor lady spends most of her days in the countryside, court is the sun around which her world orbits. She may live miles away, but every decision, every fashion, every scandal that unfolds beneath the glittering ceilings of the royal palace casts a shadow long enough to reach her breakfast table. Court is not just a place. It is an atmosphere, a rumour, a gravitational force. And even if she is not walking its polished floors today, she is shaped by it, as surely as the moon is shaped by the pull of the tide. But on the days she does go to court, that is when the theatre truly begins. A Tudor lady does not simply arrive at court, she enters, and she does so with the acute awareness that hundreds of eyes might fall on her. Some curious, some calculating, some eager to decide whether her sleeves are too long, her curtsy too shallow, or her expression too bold. Court is a place where people judge you for blinking incorrectly. Her behaviour becomes a delicate choreography. She glides through corridors as though every stone bears witness. She knows precisely when to bow, whom to avoid, and when to stand very still and pretend she doesn't hear the conversation happening 2 steps away, even though she absolutely does. Court is observation turned into a profession, and she is by necessity very good at it. The first rule of court life is simple: watch everything. Watch the way people move. Watch where they stand. Watch whose arm they touch lightly while laughing. Watch who is smiling too widely. Watch who is not smiling at all. Watch what colours people wear after political shifts. Watch who has been invited into the royal presence and who has conspicuously not. Court is a river of information, and she must drink from it without making a ripple. The second rule: bow precisely and sincerely, even when insincerely sincere. Curtsying at court is less about respect and more about avoiding trouble. Bow too deeply, and you appear desperate. Not deeply enough, and you appear arrogant. Curtsy at the wrong time, and you risk offending someone whose cousin once loaned money to someone the Queen disliked 3 years ago. You must bow like a feather drifting downward, gracefully, gently, as though gravity itself finds you charming. The third rule: sense danger before it materializes. Court danger is rarely violent. It is conversational, a remark dressed as a compliment, a rumour disguised as concern. A gesture misinterpreted by someone who's made an entire lifestyle out of taking offence. A Tudor lady must learn to read danger the way a sailor reads storms, by subtle shifts in air pressure, tone, and who is suddenly whispering near the tapestries. Danger can be the wrong smile to the wrong person, or the right smile offered a moment too late. It can hide in a misplaced sigh, a delayed greeting, a laugh that carries across the room at the wrong time. Court danger is quiet, elegant, and lethal to reputations. And then, of course, there is gift-giving, the gentle art of bribery disguised as generosity. At court, gifts are currency with ribbons on them, a carefully chosen book for the Queen's lady, a fragrant pomander for a duchess's daughter, a piece of embroidery offered at just the right moment to suggest loyalty without appearing strategic. Gifts allow a lady to say, "I come in peace," without ever speaking the words. They also allow her to say, "Remember me," without appearing desperate. But gift-giving is a dangerous game. Give too much and people will talk. Give too little and people will talk. Give something too valuable and you risk implying ambition. Give something too simple and you risk implying carelessness. Court expects a lady to walk the line of thoughtful elegance with the precision of someone stitching a hem while riding a horse. Favour-seeking is another essential art. It must be done with subtlety. A lady never asks directly for anything. Not an introduction, not a recommendation, not a whisper of goodwill. No, she must place herself in situations where favours seem like other people's ideas. She might compliment someone's taste, mention a small difficulty in passing, and then step lightly away so the seed of assistance can blossom without her appearing to water it. Favour-seeking at court is essentially gardening with gossip. And gossip, yes, rumour management, the true currency of power. Court is built of stone and gossip. Only one of those things moves fast enough to matter. A Tudor lady must manage rumours like a beekeeper manages bees, carefully, calmly, without swatting. She listens without appearing to listen. She stores information without letting it stain her expression. She knows when to pass a rumour on softly, gently to the right person at the right moment, and when to let one die in the privacy of her thoughts. Rumours can elevate her standing or shatter it. They can protect her allies or expose her enemies. They can drift around her like perfume or swarm her like insects. Her success depends on keeping them at a respectful distance. Even if she's rarely at court, the court still shapes her daily life. If the Queen favours French fashion, she must adjust her wardrobe. If a noble is disgraced, she must distance her family politely. If the King changes religious policy again, well, she must rewrite her spiritual habits overnight with the serene expression of someone who has never been confused in her entire life. Court is not merely a place she visits, it is a shadow stretching across her world. A rumour whispered miles away can shape how she behaves tomorrow. A scandal she never witnessed can determine the fate of her family. A shift in royal favour can transform her life without her setting foot near the palace. The theatre of power extends far beyond the stage, and she, willingly or not, is always part of the performance. There is a moment just after the morning obligations loosen their grip, but before the rest of the day begins its steady march, when your Tudor lady slips outside for a walk. Not a brisk march, not a purposeful stride, just a slow, quiet escape into the gardens. The manor may be her world, but the gardens are her refuge, the one place where she can breathe without someone evaluating the quality of her inhalation. She steps into the morning air and lets the door close behind her with a soft thud, the kind that sounds like a secret being tucked away. The sunlight falls gently across the stone path, warming patches of moss that cling stubbornly between the cracks. A breeze stirs, carrying the scent of damp earth, crushed herbs, and the faintest hint of wood smoke drifting from the kitchen chimney. She takes a slow breath, one she allows herself to feel fully. Here in the garden, her posture loosens ever so slightly, like a ribbon untied after being pulled too tightly. Her steps are soft, measured more by instinct than etiquette. Out here, no one is judging the angle of her wrist or the distance between her chin and her collarbone. Even the birds seem kinder than the relatives inside. She begins walking the gravel path, each step producing a soft crunch, the kind of soothing sound that quiets the mind. Along the borders, early blooms unfold shyly, their petals still heavy with dew. The roses, not yet in full arrogance, offer a gentle fragrance instead of their usual perfume superiority. Lavender hums softly beneath the fingertips of bees busy enough to ignore her entirely. From a distance, this garden appears to be a space of effortless beauty. But she knows better. A Tudor garden is not wild, it is disciplined, every hedge clipped, every path deliberate, every plant chosen for symbolism as much as scent. These gardens are extensions of status, living proof that the household has the resources to tend the earth into obedience. The symmetry of the hedges reflects the symmetry expected of her life. Yet for her, the gardens are more than a display of wealth. They're a pocket of privacy, a place where her thoughts can wander, even if her feet cannot stray too far. And as you follow behind her, quietly, gently, you begin to slip into her perspective. You feel the slight coolness lingering in the shade and the warmth where sunlight pools like golden cloth draped across the ground. You hear the soft rustle of leaves overhead, the distant clucking of hens somewhere beyond the orchard wall, and the faint rhythmic knocking of a gardener sharpening tools. You walk where she walks, feeling the path tilt slightly beneath your feet, noticing the careful arrangement of herbs in their raised beds. Sage, thyme, rosemary, mint, each sprig clipped neatly, each row forming part of the household's quiet pharmacy. The scents blend as you move closer, earthy and sharp and calming all at once. She pauses beneath an arch of climbing vines, lifting her face toward the filtered light. The shadows dance across her skin in delicate patterns, almost like lace. She takes in the view before her, a view she has seen thousands of times, and still finds it grounding. A garden is a place where time behaves differently. Seasons dictate progress, not social whims or political shifts. The roses will bloom whether the queen smiles or frowns. The apple trees will fruit regardless of which noble family has fallen out of favour this week. Here she can simply be. She wanders toward the orchard, where the trees stand in well-organised rows, their branches swaying softly. In spring, these trees burst with blossoms that make the entire garden smell like a sweet, fragile dream. In summer, they offer shade and fruit. In autumn, they drop leaves that rustle underfoot like whispers, and in winter, their bare branches draw sharp, elegant lines against a pale sky. Every season brings a different version of the garden, and she knows them all intimately. A bird flits past, landing on a low branch. It tilts its head toward her, considering her presence, then resumes its chirping with the indifference of someone unimpressed by noble titles. She smiles, one of the few unguarded smiles she allows herself during the day. She continues walking, moving toward the still pool at the centre of the garden. The water is calm, reflecting the sky with such clarity that for a moment it seems like an opening to another world. She stands at the edge, watching the surface ripple as a breeze skims across it. Her reflection wavers, not distorted exactly, just softened, as though the water understands she rarely gets the chance to see herself without the weight of expectation. You pause with her, watching the reflection shift. You feel a quietness settle into your shoulders, a calm that seeps downward like warmth into tired bones. And then, very faintly, you hear distant sounds of the household stirring. A door closing, a servant calling instructions, a horse snorting in the stable yard. Life beckons. But for now, for these last stolen moments, she remains still. She lets her thoughts float freely, worries, memories, dreams she would never dare voice aloud. The garden catches them all gently, as it always has. She brushes her fingertips along a row of soft petals, almost as though greeting old friends. The flowers nod in the breeze. She breathes in one more deep breath, letting the scent of morning settle into her. And you feel it too, a softness, a slowing, an ease. This is her sanctuary, her refuge, her whispered rebellion against a life built on structure. Soon she will return to the manor with its obligations, its expectations, its watching eyes. Marriage for a Tudor noblewoman was not a thunderbolt of affection or a gentle drift into companionship. It was a contract, carefully inked, occasionally cold, and almost always orchestrated by people who valued land far more than love. If modern marriage is a duet, Tudor noble marriage was a business merger with decorative ribbons tied around the legal documents. From the moment your lady was born, her future marriage began hovering in the background like a polite but persistent ghost. Not a frightening ghost, just one that kept clearing its throat at her family, reminding them that the clock was ticking and alliances wouldn't build themselves. Marriage negotiations could begin before she even reached adolescence. Families sized each other up, whispered about dowries, inspected lineage with a kind of scrutiny normally reserved for prized horses, and considered whether a union would bring wealth, prestige, or, best of all, strategic convenience. For noble families, marriage was diplomatic warfare wrapped in silk. Her dowry was the opening volley. It could include land, money, livestock, rights to mills or fisheries, or promises tied up in neat ribbons of future obligations. Some dowries were so large they practically glowed. Others were modest and therefore required extra charm, better connections, or the hope that the bride's father had recently done someone an influential favour, involving grain shipments or discreet political flattery. Dowries were not sentimental gifts. They were leverage, tangible proof of value. The larger the dowry, the brighter the bride's prospects. And the more likely it was that her opinions would be politely ignored during negotiations. Her future husband's family would then offer a jointure in return, a sort of insurance policy that guaranteed she wouldn't be left destitute if she outlived her spouse. The jointure was not about generosity. It was about appearances. No noble family wanted to be known for leaving widows wandering the countryside like poorly dressed ghosts. Respectability mattered. And so the dance began. Families met, representatives discussed, terms were weighed, and somewhere in the background, your Tudor lady waited, calm, composed, and deeply aware that her entire future was being shaped by people who might not even remember what her favourite colour was. It wasn't cruelty, it was simply the system. Noble daughters were diplomats wrapped in embroidery. And what did she feel about all this? Well, that depended. A Tudor noblewoman learned early to tame her emotions into acceptable shapes. She understood that disappointment must be swallowed quietly, that hope must be disguised under modest smiles, and that fear could be tucked neatly beneath the fold of a prayer. If she dreamed of choosing her partner, she kept it to herself. If she dreaded the match arranged for her, she revealed nothing, because the match was not about her happiness. It was about her family's future. That is not to say she was robbed of all feeling. Tudor noblewomen were human beings, not embroidered dolls. They felt nervousness, curiosity, sometimes affection, sometimes resentment, sometimes cautious relief, sometimes cautious dread. Their emotional world was broad, but the space in which they were allowed to express it was painfully narrow. Once the marriage was agreed upon, the betrothal became a formal promise with legal teeth. Breaking a betrothal was not the casual drama modern people imagine. It was a scandal, a humiliation, a potential diplomatic crisis. Families might erupt in outrage. Letters flew, blame settled in corners like dust. People talked. People always talked. The wedding itself was lovely, of course, filled with music, ceremony, and enough finery to reflect well on both families. But beneath the celebration lay a simple truth. This was not an ending of girlhood with a romantic beginning. It was the start of responsibility. She would now represent not one household but two. Her actions would reflect on her husband's name. Her behaviour would affect the stability of alliances, and her ability to produce heirs would become a topic everyone whispered about behind politely raised goblets. Meanwhile, peasant women, those living far from the pressure of manuscripts, dowries, and court politics, experienced marriage differently, not without constraints, not without expectations, but with a kind of practical agency noble women rarely tasted. A peasant girl often chose someone she knew, someone from her village, someone she worked beside, someone she had exchanged smiles with while collecting water or tending fields. Love was not always the driving force, but familiarity was. Partnership was. There were negotiations, yes. Families rarely left big decisions untouched, but the stakes were smaller, the consequences less politically explosive. Her dowry might be a cow, a chest of linens, or a patch of land. Her future was tied to daily labour, not lineage. She could speak more freely. She could laugh more openly. She could argue, if necessary, without fearing that her words would ripple into a diplomatic disaster. Both noble and peasant women bore heavy burdens, of course, but the noblewoman's burdens were embroidered, perfumed, and politely ignored by the men who crafted the rules. The emotional reality for a Tudor noblewoman was more complex than silence. She might grow to respect her husband. She might even like him. Some marriages surprised everyone by blossoming into genuine companionship. Others remained cool, polite arrangements that functioned like business partnerships, with occasional attempts at tenderness, and some were endured, quietly, skillfully, with grace that only other women truly understood, because noble women supported one another through marriage in ways the historical record barely whispers about. They exchanged knowing glances, comforting touches, shared prayers, coded letters. They understood the weight of their roles. They understood the delicate balance between resignation and resilience. Marriage, for a Tudor lady, did not define her, but it shaped the walls she lived within. It determined where she resided, whom she served, how she was judged, and how she navigated the world. It gave her certain privileges and took away others. It opened doors and quietly locked others, and through it all she learned to adapt, to find slivers of independence in polite shadows, and to carve out emotional truths behind a facade of duty. Marriage was a contract, a strategy, a promise written in ink and expectation, but within that contract lived a woman, thinking, feeling, hoping, coping, and she carried those inner thoughts with her, carefully hidden beneath the dignified fold of her sleeve. And since you're still here, quietly absorbing Tudor marital trauma with me, you might as well subscribe. Otherwise, all this historical heartbreak was researched for nothing. If you want to understand a Tudor noblewoman's true power, you must look not at her jewels, or her gowns, or the refined way she lowers her eyes at precisely the correct angle. No, her real influence lives in the quiet machinery of the household she oversees. While men strutted through politics and land disputes like peacocks in wool cloaks, she managed a world that actually functioned. And she did it so smoothly that most people assumed it ran itself. It did not. Not even close. A noble household was a small economy, part business, part village, part reputation factory, and she was at its centre, the calm coordinator who ensured that everything ran gracefully, invisibly, and ideally without any fire-related mishaps. There were so many candles. Fires happened. Her authority was not loud. It was not official. It didn't come stamped with seals or heraldry. Instead, it lived in the subtle, relentless competence that kept the entire estate from collapsing into chaos. First came the budgeting, the unsung art of knowing exactly how many coins could be spent on grain, candles, salt, spices, rushes, ribbons, repairs, and the occasional emergency purchase of new linen when a visiting uncle managed to spill wine on everything within reach. Her household accounts were thick with numbers, lists, and tiny notations that only she could decipher. She tracked expenses the way a modern accountant tracks invoices, except she had to do it while wearing 15 pounds of fabric and maintaining serene posture. A Tudor lady did not sit hunched over her accounts muttering to herself. She reviewed them delicately, nibbling politely at her lip, while calculating more efficiently than half the men who believe themselves experts in money simply because they owned land. Her inventory lists were equally impressive. She knew exactly how many bolts of linen the house possessed, which cupboards held the good pewter, which chests contained the embroidered tablecloths reserved for important feasts, and whether the winter stores of grain were holding up as expected. She could tell if a servant had used too much soap. She could sense if rush mats had been replaced too late. She knew when a barrel of ale had been tapped prematurely, because she understood precisely how quickly it should empty. Her knowledge was almost supernatural, but really it was simply the result of years of training and the keen awareness that if anything went wrong, she would be quietly blamed. Then came the seasonal planning. A Tudor estate lived and breathed by the cycles of the year, and she kept its heartbeat steady. She oversaw preparations for planting in spring, harvest in autumn, preservation in winter. She arranged for fruits to be dried, herbs to be hung, meats to be salted. She monitored supplies for seasonal feasting, ensuring that the kitchen didn't run short of the ingredients needed to impress whichever important person happened to stop by. A household that failed to prepare for the seasons was a household that invited embarrassment. An embarrassment in Tudor society was a form of mild social death. She organised everything. The laundry schedules, which involved cauldrons, hope and miracles, the mending rota, the brewing calendar, the cleaning rhythms of the household, and the endlessly complicated process of airing out bed linens without letting them blow into the neighbour's field. Everything required attention. Everything required forethought. And she planned it all with the elegant precision of someone arranging petals into a vase while mentally calculating the estate's annual barley consumption. Her charitable obligations were another layer of responsibility, one that carried real weight. As a noblewoman, she was expected to be the household's compassionate face, distributing alms to the poor, offering food to travellers, and supporting community needs. Charity was not merely kindness in the Tudor world, it was PR. A noble family that failed to appear generous risked whispers about greed, arrogance or miserliness, and those whispers could travel much faster than a horse. So she ensured bread was offered at the gate. She arranged for warm clothing to be donated in winter. She oversaw the distribution of leftover food and saw that the sick received assistance when possible. Her charity shaped the reputation of the entire estate, and while men liked to boast about these deeds, she was the one who ensured they actually happened. Reputation was her other form of currency. Maintaining family prestige was a subtle art, built on 1,000 small decisions that no chronicler ever bothered to record. She decided how guests were welcomed, which linens were displayed to impress them, how the household looked from room to room, which conversations were encouraged, which tempers were soothed before dinner. She ensured that servants were presentable, that meals were served smoothly, that guests departed with full stomachs and flattering opinions. She curated impressions the way artists curated paintings, carefully, strategically, with just enough flourish to be memorable, but not so much that someone accused the family of showing off. She was the quiet architect of social grace. Even within her family, her influence was constant. She managed the emotional landscape, soothing tensions, encouraging alliances, diffusing conflicts before they grew too large. She knew which children needed comforting, which visiting relations required delicate handling, and when her husband needed a gentle nudge toward a decision he believed he was making entirely on his own. Her power operated in soft tones, small suggestions, and the uncanny ability to predict issues moments before they occurred. She carried the emotional temperature of the household like a barometer beneath her ribs. Her daily work was unseen but essential. The manor did not function because the nobleman held authority. It functioned because she held everything else. The household obeyed her rhythms, her instruction, her quiet presence. Her power lived in competence, in orchestration, in the steady hands that balanced 100 invisible weights. She was, in truth, the estate's heartbeat, not recognized publicly, not praised loudly, but essential, utterly, non-negotiably essential. And though Tudor law denied her ownership, denied her official authority, denied her political voice, it could not deny the truth quietly known by every servant, every guest, every relative. If you truly want to understand a Tudor noblewoman, you must enter the one place no historian can map, no portrait can depict, and no record book can confess: the quiet interior chamber of her mind. It is a room she keeps locked, even from those who love her, especially from those who judge her. And yet it shapes every gesture, every smile, every perfectly measured breath she releases into the world. Her day may appear orderly, structured by duty, shaped by etiquette, softened by embroidery and garden walks, but beneath that smooth surface lies a complicated landscape of fears, ambitions, guilt, and small, silent rebellions. A place where she allows herself to feel everything she would never dare express. Fear is one of her oldest companions, not the dramatic fear of cinematic peril, but the smaller, constant fears that settle into her bones like cold. The fear of disappointing her family, the fear of speaking too boldly, the fear of not producing an heir quickly enough, the fear of producing too many daughters, the fear of falling out of favor with someone powerful and not even knowing why, the fear that one misinterpreted gesture could ripple through the household and return to her in the form of raised eyebrows and polite concern. Fear has become a familiar shadow, but she carries it with elegance, smoothing it beneath her sleeves as though it were only a fold in her gown. Beside fear stands ambition, soft, subtle, dignified ambition. She will never dream aloud of greatness. Tudor society prefers humble women, decorative women, women who do not admit they think strategically, but she does think strategically. She considers alliances when speaking with guests. She imagines possibilities when walking the gardens. She wonders what influence she might wield if she were allowed the same intellectual space her brothers take for granted. Her ambition is quiet, not because it lacks fire, but because fire must be hidden when you live in a house built of rules. Guilt also lingers in that inner room. Tudor guilt is complicated, half personal, half inherited. She feels guilty when she wishes briefly for a different life. Guilty when she dreams of studying Latin more seriously. Guilty when she envies men who can argue publicly. Guilty when she dislikes a decision her father has made. Guilty when she dislikes a decision her husband has made. Guilty when she imagines she might, in some distant year, wish for more independence. She tells herself these feelings are normal. Her conduct books warn her that women must guard their thoughts as much as their modesty. And so she folds her guilt carefully and stores it like linens, out of sight, out of mention, but never truly gone. Her longing, though, now that is the most tender part of her inner life. Longing takes many shapes. Sometimes she longs for a conversation without restraint. Sometimes she longs to ride farther than etiquette allows. Sometimes she longs for an hour with no duties attached to it. Sometimes she dreams of writing something bold, something that would make future generations whisper, "She must have been remarkable." But she also has softer longings, for harmony in her household, for the safety of her children, for calm after a week of political tension she's not supposed to notice, let alone analyze. Her longing is not one singular desire. It is the composite ache of a life lived in careful balance. And through all of this, she must appear calm. Calm is her armor. Calm is her currency. Calm is the trait most praised in noble women, as though serenity were a natural resource she can produce on command. She learns early to control her breathing, to lower her voice, to smooth her expression, to listen without reacting, to hold herself with gentle composure, even when her stomach tightens with worry or irritation or disappointment. Her internal conflict is a quiet storm she manages with the skill of someone who has been navigating it since girlhood. She questions herself privately, pondering whether her thoughts are loyal or rebellious, whether her desires are acceptable or dangerous. She rehearses responses before offering them. She reviews her own silence to ensure it was not too long, not too short, not too revealing. And yet, despite all this vigilance, she finds small ways to rebel, not loudly, not destructively, but with the grace of someone who knows rebellion must be disguised as refinement. Sometimes she reads a book she knows she shouldn't be reading, a text with ideas slightly too bold for polite discussion, something theological, philosophical, or simply a story with a heroine who behaves in ways that would earn a Tudor lady a stern lecture. She reads in secret by a window when the house is quiet. The thrill is quiet too, but unmistakable. Sometimes she writes a poem, a reflection, a line of thought she will tear up later. Writing is a dangerous pleasure, too revealing, too honest. But for a brief moment she lets the ink speak where her voice cannot. Sometimes her rebellion takes the form of refusal, a gentle, subtle refusal to internalize every expectation placed upon her. She may still obey the rules, but she does not let them define her inner world. That private space remains hers, untouched by public demands. And sometimes her rebellion is simply this, allowing herself to imagine another version of life, not because she intends to chase it, but because imagining gives her breath when duty feels too tightly laced. Her inner life is never loud, never disruptive, but it is vast and vivid, a quiet landscape of thoughts shaped by pressure, polished by duty, and strengthened by the resilience she's never officially credited for. When you see her moving through her day, calm, composed, elegant, you see only the surface, a smooth reflection in a still pool. What lies beneath is deeper, richer, more complex than anyone around her will ever fully know. She's a woman navigating a world that grants her status but withholds autonomy, that gives her comfort but denies her ownership, that praises her for grace while demanding silence in the same breath. And yet she adapts, survives, influences, dreams. Her outer life may belong to the Tudor order, but her inner life, vast, intricate, untamed, belongs to her alone. Evening in a Tudor manor arrives slowly, like a curtain being drawn across the sky. The final light stretches long and thin across the floorboards, softening the edges of the day. And this is when your noble lady finally begins to shed the careful posture, the measured gestures, the perfect composure she has worn since morning. Evening is not freedom exactly, but it is the closest she comes to it. Her day has been full of expectations, conversations, performances. But now, as the house settles into a gentler hum, she retreats to her chamber with the unspoken understanding that the world outside her door can wait. For a moment, at least. She begins with warmth, a bath prepared in a wooden tub, filled with water heated in the kitchen and carried upstairs by servants. It is steeped with herbs, lavender for calm, rosemary for clarity, chamomile to soothe the muscles made tense by etiquette. The steam rises in soft curls, fogging the edges of the candlelight. She sinks into the warmth with the faintest sigh, the kind that escapes before she can catch it, a sigh that acknowledges she has been holding herself together all day. Her maid gently pours scented water over her shoulders, the fragrance mixing with the soft hiss of the flames. The sound is soothing, almost hypnotic. You can imagine it, the faint slosh, the quiet echoes against the wooden tub, the muted murmur of footsteps outside the chamber. The manor breathes differently at night, softer, slower. From the outside, her bathing ritual seems indulgent. But this is not luxury. It is necessity. This is the time when she allows her mind to loosen, when she lets thoughts drift not in careful circles but in soft, unstructured wanderings. She thinks of the conversation she had throughout the day, the questions she answered, the ones she avoided. She reviews small details, what she noticed, what she felt, what she hid. And then, when she steps from the bath and the maid wraps her in warm linen, she shifts from third person to something closer, something more intimate. Because now, you are with her, and if you were the one stepping from that fragrant bath, you would feel the weight of your gown lifted from your shoulders like a burden finally set aside. You would feel your hair loosen as pins are gently pulled free, each one releasing a tiny tension you didn't realize you'd been carrying. Your scalp tingles relieved, finally allowed to breathe. The strands fall softly around you, still heavy, still formal, but no longer bound into perfect order. Your gown is loosened, not removed entirely, but freed at the laces, giving you space to inhale deeply. Tudor clothing may be beautiful, but it is far less appealing when one is trying to relax. So you allow yourself this quiet indignity, letting the layers shift just enough that your ribs no longer feel like a decorative cage. Candles glow around the room, their light warm and irregular. Shadows move across the walls like gentle, aimless dancers. The hearth crackles in the corner, the fire low but comforting. Everything is whisper soft. Even the air feels different, warmer, more intimate. And this is when she speaks. Not the polished conversation of daytime, not the dutiful chatter, but real conversation, quiet, honest, and shared only with the women she trusts most. A maid who has been with her since childhood. A cousin visiting for the season. A companion who understands her moods without requiring explanation. They sit near the fire, sewing baskets pushed aside, their work abandoned for the night. Their voices drop to a murmur, not because they fear being overheard, but because softness comes naturally when the world outside is dimmed. They speak of small things first. A joke from dinner, the odd behaviour of a favourite hound, the latest incident involving a clumsy servant and a tray of pewter cups. They laugh lightly, quiet laughter restrained by habit, but real. Then, gently, the conversation shifts. Night invites honesty. Shadows can hold secrets better than daylight can. She admits a worry she has carried all week. She confesses a moment of envy she knows is unbecoming. She wonders aloud whether she misjudged someone. She reveals a hope so fragile she dares speak it only now when the candles are low and the room feels like a sanctuary. And the women around her listen, not as subjects or subordinates, but as sisters in the shared strangeness of Tudor womanhood. They nod, reassure, tease affectionately, offer advice that comes wrapped in warmth rather than obligation. Their words weave a safety net around her, one she cannot acknowledge publicly, but one she relies on deeply. If you were with her, if you were sitting near the flickering fire, the warmth brushing your skin, you would feel the weight of the day sliding quietly from your shoulders. You would feel companionship settle beside you like a soft blanket. You would feel the tense, polished version of yourself slipping further and further away. Because the mask she wears, the one you wear with her, can finally loosen, not fall, not vanish, but loosen. And as the hour grows later, the conversation fades. The women drift away to their duties or their beds. She remains by the fire a moment longer, staring into the embers, her thoughts settling into a calm, reflective hum. This is the closest she ever comes to solitude, a rare, delicate peace. Then she rises, her gown whispering against the floor. A maid extinguishes all but one candle. The room dims again, the fire sighs. Nightfall in a Tudor manor feels nothing like dawn. Dawn is expectation stretching its arms. Dawn is responsibility wiping the sleep from its eyes. Dawn is preparation, poise, composure waiting impatiently behind the door. But night is the moment when the world finally exhales. When the house, the corridors, the portraits, even the air itself release her from the invisible strings they pull throughout the day. The last of the embers glow softly in the hearth. The halls, once filled with footsteps and voices, settle into a hush that feels almost sacred. The only sounds are the distant creak of a timber adjusting to the cool, the quiet murmur of a maid finishing her final duties, the crisp flutter of a candle's flame as it straightens itself before sleep. She sits at the edge of her bed, her great carved bed, large enough to impress guests, cold enough to humble anyone who forgets their place. The bedposts rise like silent guards, watching over her with stoic woodwork. The heavy curtains surrounding the bed soften the draught, creating a small sanctuary inside the larger room. She closes her eyes. Her shoulders drop as though released from a weight she didn't allow herself to acknowledge until now. Her hair, unbraided, brushed, loosened into its natural quiet fall, rests warmly across her back. She touches a stray lock, feeling its softness, appreciating the rare moment when it isn't being shaped, pinned, or corrected. Night allows her body to belong to her again. If you were with her now, if you stepped into her quiet, private mind, you would feel a stillness settle into your chest. You would feel the echoes of the day fading, the roles she played dissolving like mist. This is the only hour she's not performing, the only hour where she does not have to impress, charm, strategize, or anticipate. The world has finally released her. She draws a soft breath. It is unmeasured, unconsidered, entirely her own. Her mind drifts, not in sharp lines, but in soft shapes. She thinks of small things, not the heavy ones. Those can wait until morning. Tonight she lets her thoughts skim across memories like stones skipping across water. A scent she noticed in the garden earlier. A line of poetry she read last week. A smile from someone she trusts. The warm flicker of candlelight on the embroidered cushion she stitched months ago. She savours these thoughts. They are simple, private, gentle. Night's privacy is different from solitude. Solitude can still carry pressure, can still feel like someone is watching from a distance, even when they're not. But privacy, real privacy, is the quiet conviction that no one expects anything of you in this moment. Not a word, not a gesture, not a performance, just breath, just presence. She shifts beneath the soft linen sheets. They're cool at first touch, but they warm quickly beneath her skin. The mattress, stuffed with straw and wool, creaks quietly as she settles into it. Her muscles relax into the familiar unevenness of the bed. She knows every soft spot, every firm patch, every place where the stuffing has migrated like a small woolen animal seeking comfort. The candle flickers again, shorter now, tired. She watches the flame bend and steady itself, as though considering sleep. Shadows ripple gently across the curtains. Her mind slows with the flame's rhythm. Each flicker seems to tug one more piece of tension from her body. She lies back fully, the pillow supporting her head with the faint scent of lavender and soap. The ceiling above her fades into shadow and she watches it soften, blur. In this half-darkness, her thoughts melt into one another. She wonders what tomorrow will bring, but only for a moment. Tomorrow can wait, morning can wait, duty can wait. Tonight is hers, and as she drifts, you drift with her. The air in the curtains feels warmer. The sheets soften around both of you. Her breath deepens, and you feel your own breath match it unconsciously. The world outside her chamber fades into obscurity. Even the manor's grand architecture seems small now, reduced to a faint outline beyond the bed curtains. Her final thoughts are gentle ones. She hopes for peace tomorrow. She thinks of someone she loves. She imagines a quiet moment she might steal again in the gardens. She whispers a small prayer, half gratitude, half wish, whispered only to the darkness. And then she lets go of the day completely. The last candle guttered softly, making its tiny farewell. Darkness deepens, not heavy, not frightening, but soothing. A velvet dark, the kind that holds rather than hides. Her mind drifts, unbound now, moving slowly towards sleep. The walls around her, so stern and formal in daylight, soften into faint silhouettes. The wind outside quiets. The manor falls fully still. This is the moment when her world releases her entirely, when there are no eyes watching, no rules binding, no expectations echoing in her head. Only the gentle rise and fall of breath, the warmth of blankets, and the quiet assurance that for the next several hours she belongs to no one but herself. And now, as you lie here drifting with her into the quiet of night, thank you for walking beside her through an entire Tudor day. It wasn't a simple day, was it? Not for her, and not for you, now that you've seen everything she had to balance beneath those embroidered sleeves. You've stepped through her world, the weight of expectation, the grace she perfected, the thoughts she carried in silence. You felt the hush of her gardens, the tension of her meals, the soft unbinding of her hair at night. And somewhere along the path, without even noticing, you slipped gently into her skin. For a moment you understood her life from the inside out, because a Tudor lady was never just one thing. She was a manager, a diplomat, an emotional contortionist, a strategist, a performer and a dreamer, all wrapped inside a life she did not ask for, but learned to navigate with remarkable quiet strength. History often forgets that complexity, but you saw it, you felt it. You breathed in the slow patterns of her day, and now you carry a little piece of her story with you. So thank you for giving your attention, your imagination, your presence. In a world filled with noise, the fact that you chose to spend this time listening, reflecting, and settling into calm with me is something I truly appreciate. And if you enjoyed wandering through Tudor nightfall like this, if you felt the peace, the slow unwinding, the softness of slipping into another time, consider subscribing. Not because of algorithms or numbers, but because it genuinely supports the hours, the reading, the scribbled notes, and the quiet obsession it takes to bring you journeys like this. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. But for now, let your breath stay slow. Let your mind drift. Let the last traces of candlelight in her chamber fade into darkness. You're safe. You're calm. You're exactly where you need to be. And if your eyes haven't closed yet, well, they're very close. Thank you for being here. Sleep well. And truly, if you enjoyed this and don't subscribe, I'll have to assume my late-night Tudor research was all for nothing.